So Isaiah opens up, and Isaiah is really a curious book, and it's interesting for one thing because it spans such a long period of time. So you open up the book of Isaiah, chapter 1, and he begins to say that Isaiah was a prophet in the land of Judah, and he was a prophet during the course of about four different kings. Now, one of the things we know as we read through the Old Testament is there becomes a truism that as goes the heart of the king, so goes the kingdom. So when the king is pursuing God and living faithfully unto God, the kingdom is faithful, and the kingdom prospers on the basis of the people's fidelity to God and the king's faithfulness to directing the people always to see God in all that takes place. And so, conversely, when the king begins to rebel, when the king begins to get puffed up in pride, God moves to address the sins of the king and the sins of the people. So we find that as we turn to Isaiah chapter 6, that it's in the year King Uzziah died. And so it's somewhat of a pivot point for the nation of Israel, the people of Judah, that as Isaiah is there and he's prophesying, he's speaking, he's addressing the things. So it becomes helpful for us to ask the question in some sense, like, who is Uzziah and what has he done? And why in the world is it important and germane to the topic at hand? Well, in 2 Chronicles chapter 26, we are introduced to Uzziah. Now, Uzziah begins to rule and reign when he's a mere 16 years old. He begins to reign in verse 4 of chapter 26 as he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord according to all that his father Amaziah had done. He set himself to seek God in the days of Zechariah, who instructed him in the fear of God, and as long as he sought the Lord, God made him, everybody say, prosper. So notice that as long as he sought the Lord, he went and he found somebody to be a tutor, to instruct him in how to fear God, how to live faithfully unto him. And so as long as he kept his heart tethered to the teaching of God and a right response to God, everything went well. Now, what the chronicler does from there is he begins to give us various indications of what that looked like, what it looked like for God to prosper them. Look down at verse 14. Actually, look up at 7 first. It says, God helped him. He helped Uzziah against the Philistines, against the Arabians who lived in Gurbaal, and against the Meunites. The Ammonites paid tribute to Uzziah, and his fame spread even to the border of Egypt because he became very strong. So he's growing in military might. He's securing the border. He's making sure they have safety. You get down to verse 14, it says, Uzziah prepared for the army shields, spears, helmets, coats of mail, bows, stones for slinging. In Jerusalem, he made machines invented by skillful men to be on the towers and on the corners to shoot arrows and to throw great stones. And his fame spread far, for he was marvelously helped till he was, everybody say, strong. So God made him prosper, and God helped him to be strong. Now, it's from that place of prosperity, and it's from that place of strength that we begin to see the heart of Uzziah move, and the heart of Uzziah begin to be corrupted. Verse 16. It says, but when he was strong, he grew proud. When he was strong, he grew proud to his destruction. Why? It's because he was unfaithful to the Lord his God. Now, what unfaithfulness looked like in the heart of Uzziah is kind of in this moment of strength and in this moment of independence and prosperity, he goes into the temple to offer a sacrifice. He goes into the place only designated that priests could go. He goes into this place full of bravado, full of recognizing I have this unique relationship with God, and essentially I can do whatever I want to do. So he goes in there to offer the sacrifice, and Azariah and 80 of the other priests come, and they just kind of surround him, and they begin to tussle with him. They begin to argue with him and say, don't do this. Don't offer this sacrifice. Don't engage in this way. This isn't for you to do. And Uzziah just blows them off. I can do, in some sense, whatever I want to do. And in that moment, his pride leads God to afflict him with leprosy. We find that Uzziah went on to be separated from the people of God. He lives on his own. He's completely segregated and moved away from the people. Some scholars tell us for the last 10 years of his 52-year reign. And so it's at this point that Isaiah writes, what we begin to recognize and what we're getting insight into is that as Isaiah is prophesying, as he's speaking right there at the year of King Uzziah's death, bound up in the heart of the people is pride. Bound up in the heart of the people is rebellion. Bound up in the heart of the people is a sense of prosperity and independence and autonomy, the sense that that God is beholden to us rather than we are being beholden. We owe something to God. So it's from this moment that God begins to give Isaiah a vision that would typify and really describe and inform what the remainder of his ministry to the people of God in Judah would look like. So we know it says, in the year he died, look at this, Isaiah had a vision. And in his vision, he said, I saw the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple. So we don't think Isaiah was actually in a temple with God. God has given him a vision, but as he's standing there, he looks up, and what he sees is God seated upon a throne, high and exalted, far lifted above where Isaiah is. See, from Isaiah's vantage point, the majority of what he saw was the train of God's robe filling the temple, surrounding him. So it's giving this indication of majesty. It's giving an indication of grandeur. It's giving an indication of God's complete and utter sovereignty over all things. So from Isaiah's vantage point, he has no question, he has no qualm, there's no difficulty in him seeing the power and the presence of God because it is full and on display before him. And he says the glory of God spread through all the earth. So there was no place on the earth that God's glory didn't reach. There was no place on the earth that God had made, that he had spoken into existence, that did not feel the presence of God. It did not feel the might of God, and it was not living in submission to God's will and God's direction. Now, so this is what Isaiah sees, and this is what he describes. Look at verse 2. It says, above him, so above God, stood the seraphim. Now, the seraphim, you might see translated, you might have a little notation in the bottom of your Bible. It says the burning ones or the bright ones. And so this is a far cry from a car that you might pick up, a Hallmark car that has a little fat cherub, with tiny little wings, and a harp, right? And so what we see are these burning beings of light. And they are ministering spirits before God. And it says they have 6 wings. With 2, they cover their eyes. With 2, they cover their feet. And with 2, they fly around. And so they're there and they're ministering to God. And as they fly around God, what we recognize is that they're displaying an image of humility. It's an image of humility, but it's also giving us an indication that as glorious as they are, as amazing as they are, living in close proximity to God and worshiping God, they shield themselves against the glory of God. They're shielding themselves. They recognize that God dwells in eternal light, that God is light of very light. They recognize the brilliance of the glory of God, the weight of that, and so they're shielding themselves, they're covering themselves, even as they minister to God. Now check this out. They're doing that. They've got their eyes covered. They've got their feet covered. They're flying around him, and they cry out this over and over and over again. Verse 3, it says, they cry out, and they said to one another, holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. He said, the Lord of heaven's army is holy, holy, holy. Now, within a Hebrew grammar and a construction, if you wanted to talk about something being full, if you wanted to talk about something being complete, you'd double the word. So you're reading through the Old Testament, and maybe in the English you're reading it says pure gold. Probably what the Hebrew says is gold. This reminds me that I was with one of my children yesterday. We went down to Red River Gorge, and we're there, and they're jumping off a rock into the water, having a grand old time, and one of them was relaying that story today, and he said, man, and then we're up there, and all of a sudden, this old guy came. And the old guy gets on the corner of the rock, and he's there, and he's kind of adjusting, because he's old, in old knees and body parts, and he's there, and in all of his oldness, he's there, and he reaches down, and then bam, beautiful backflip into a layout, perfect dive. And the other boy says, well, how old is he? He says, old. Like, yeah, but like how old? He says, I don't know, like 50. 50? 4.5 years until I got to get on the phone with AARP. But he's not just holy, holy. He is holy, holy, holy. See, the angels, as they minister to God, are meaning to communicate that there is nothing more holy than this God. As they minister before this God, they're crying out, faces covered, crying out over and over and over again. There is no way to adequately describe, no words could clearly convey. Everything we say is always going to fall short. This is why one of the times when we speak about God, we speak about what he is not, because we feel like we can get closer to that. So he's the being that none is more holy than. He is the definition of holy. When we begin to understand God, we understand him as that which is having no sin, no mar, no deficiency. We begin to describe him in terms of those things that are fallen and frail, because all of our language ultimately falls short to describe the God who is holy, holy, holy. And Isaiah sees him. And he hears the cry of the angels as they minister to God. And as he's in this place, he begins to feel the ground quake under his feet as a voice comes from the one who calls. In fact, when the voice hits the building, the very threshold of the building begins to shake. This is what Isaiah is feeling. He is feeling the holiness of God. He is feeling the weight of what it is for God to speak. He is feeling the weight of what it is to be imminent, to be close to be in the very presence of God in this vision. And it shakes him. It absolutely shakes him. It absolutely makes him come to a renewed sense of who he is, that as he recognizes that to love God is to say yes to his holiness. And even as we say yes to his holiness, it necessitates that we begin to say yes to his extension of redemption. You see, Isaiah sees God. He experiences the quake of God's voice. And look at verse 5, and it says, "And I said, woe is me, for I am lost." Now, he's not describing his spiritual state when he says he's lost. He's describing his physical state. In Revelation chapter 1 and verse 17, John, the Apostle John, sees a vision of Jesus. He said, "I saw Jesus. His hair was white, his eyes were a fire, a sword coming from his mouth, and I dropped to the ground as though dead." You see, but because what Isaiah knows and what John knows is that to encounter God as he is in all of his holiness leads us to an acute sense and an awareness of our brokenness. And in our brokenness, we have this understanding: I cannot stand, I cannot be in his presence, I must be about to die. There is in this moment for Isaiah such an acute, grave, overwhelming sense of the sin that clings to his life and all the various ways that he fails to attain to what it is to not be holy, 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 but what it is merely to be holy, what it is to be righteous, what it is to be approved. So he stands before God. He says, "Woe is me. I'm lost, for I'm a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a land of a people with unclean lips." So he says first of himself and of his personal estate, of his personal sin before God. He says, "I am a sinner." He recognizes what Paul would say in Romans 3 and 23, "For all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God." He recognizes what you would say on a Monday when you wake up and you curse that it's a Monday and you've squandered the weekend. He recognizes what you and I would say when we find ourselves in the midst of sin, when we find ourselves unearthed, when we find ourselves outed, when we find ourselves wrestling with the impact of our sin. Woe is me. I'm broken. Notice that he doesn't say, "Listen, I see you on the throne. Like, I felt the quake. I hear the call. Can we just have a conversation about this? Can I give you some rationale? Can I give you some reasons? Can I offer up a defense for my sinfulness? Is there something I can do to atone for my sinfulness? Is there something I can do to enter into kind of a bartering, like an exchange program, where I give you this, you turn your head this way, and we just kind of excuse my behavior and the things I'm into?" No, in that moment, there are no excuses for his sin. He identifies with his sin and his sinfulness. He says, "I am a man of unclean lips." And he looks at the people around him. He looks at the people he's ministering to. He looks at the people who followed Uzziah into his pride, who are puffed up, who are independent, who are prosperous, strong, and on their own. And he says, "And I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. Woe is me. woe is us. We're lost. In that moment, as he begins to say and recognize his brokenness, he's saying yes to his brokenness, he begins to recognize the necessity of saying yes to God's offer of redemption. Look at verse 6. Look at verse 6. It says, then one of the bright ones, then one of the burning ones, the ones crying out, holy, 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 he flew to me, having in his hand a burning coal that he'd taken with tongs from the altar. So he flies over, he takes from the altar a burning coal, and he comes near to Isaiah. He comes near to Isaiah at the point of his sinfulness. It's no mere coincidence that it touches his lips. He touches his lips because this is what Isaiah has described as the point of his sinfulness, the point of his brokenness, the point of his need, the point where he most acutely recognizes the separation between himself and God. And so God moves directly to the point of egregious sin in his life, and he touches it. This is the love of God mediated through his ministering spirit. And in the moment when he touches sinful Isaiah with the coal taken from the altar, what does it say? You see, the angel doesn't want there to be any misunderstanding. He doesn't want Isaiah to think, I've had a great experience. I've had a really heartwarming vision. I've had something that's really impacted me. I need to hold on to this. No, he tells him what it means. He says, it has touched you. It has touched you. It has touched your lips. And your guilt is taken away, and your sin is atoned for. He says, Isaiah, we saw you in your frailty, and we saw all the various sins and your guilt, the ownership you have over that sin. It's no longer there. But it's not just merely wiped away, it is accounted for. It has, the wrath of God has been satisfied because it has touched you, and your sin is not merely taken away, but it's also paid for. The penalty, the punishment of that sin has been atoned for. It's been atoned for. So Isaiah, now as he sees God, you see, now as he sees God, he doesn't have this inner sense of shame. He doesn't have this inner sense of being a person who of unclean lips. He doesn't have this inner sense of being a person who is sullied. He doesn't have the sense of being this person who, as he stands before God, feels the weight of his awesomeness, the majesty of his glory press upon the brokenness of Isaiah. So he feels himself emboldened for the call of God. And what we see is a transformation in Isaiah from being a man of unclean lips to a man of purified lips, ready for the purpose and the plan of God. Now he's ready to be used. Now he's ready to be commissioned. Now he's ready to be employed. So we recognize that saying yes to a love of God, additionally, is saying yes to his call. Saying yes to his call. Look at verse 8. Isaiah writes and he says, I heard a voice from the Lord saying, whom shall I send and who will go for us? Then I said, here I am, send me. There could be a sense of Isaiah. So he stepped into this new state, this new experience. His sins have been wiped away. They've been atoned for. His past record, and whatever that looked like, is no more. It no longer holds sway over his life. And there's a sense at which when God says, who's going to go for us and who will I send, that Isaiah could have done, see a whole lot of robes, see a whole lot of flying angels. It looks like I'm alone in here. Hey, God, looks like you don't have a whole lot of options. Can we talk about this? Like, where is this place you want me to go? What does it look like? What's the pay going to be like? What's the vacation schedule? Got a lot of things worked in. I've been training for this half marathon. That's kind of a big deal for me. I've been really sacrificing. You saw me bulking. Well, I've been cutting. I've been really kind of cutting the last month or two, and I just really want to make sure that the place I go has an adequate provision for my diet. Can we spell that out? Are you okay with that? Can we work that out? No, Isaiah says everything that I had planned, everything that I had before me, all those things are secondary to submitting to the call of God. When we truly encounter God in his holiness as he is, there are no prerequisites to our service. So we come into this understanding of what it is to have been saved from the wrath of God, to having our sins atoned for, to being truly, marvelously, wonderfully, perfectly saved. When God says who will go for us, we should be clamoring to be the one sent. Instead of what is often our posture, were cowering and praying somebody would raise their hand. When God says, who will go for us? What it is to be a Christian is to be those who say, we will go. Who will go for us is to be those who as a church say, we will go. Who will cover this expense? We will cover this expense. Who will sacrifice for me? We will sacrifice for you. Who will bear my name and bear up underneath the burden of what it is to carry it? We will go. We will bear it. We will go forth. This is the pattern Isaiah says when he says yes to the redemption of God and he says yes to the call of God. Here I am, send me. Now, the ministry and the message that God gives Isaiah is terrible. It's horrible. It's a message that all of their wandering, that all of their dishonesty is finally going to be articulated in the mouth of Isaiah, and it's going to find its punishment on the people of God during the time of Isaiah. Before the people of God cross over the Jordan into the promised land, God takes them in Deuteronomy 27 and 28, and he has them utter a series of blessings and a series of cursings. So he says, if you obey me, if you're faithful to me, all the blessings are yours. You're going to dwell for a long time in the land. I'm going to cause you to prosper. I'm going to fight your battles for you. I'm going to make you strong and secure, and you will live in the land for a long time. If, on the other hand, you disobey, you dishonor the Lord, you're going to receive God's cursings. And the full bore, the end of all of the cursings that they would receive as a result of their disobedience looks like losing the land. It looks like on the basis of their rebellion that they head into exile and ultimately exile in Babylon. And so essentially what God is setting Isaiah up for is to be the mouthpiece for that punishment. For years and years they've disobeyed. Good kings, bad kings, indifferent kings, neutral kings, prophets, judges. The people are just kind of up and down, but the continual pattern that we see in the unveiling behaviors contained within the Old Testament is disbelief, dishonesty, and dishonoring God. And so essentially what Isaiah is told to do is to go and be a voice of punishment and woe. Listen to what he says. Verse 9, he says, go and say to these people, keep on hearing, but do not understand. Keep on hearing, keep on listening, keep on nodding your head vacantly, but don't understand. Keep on seeing, but don't perceive. Keep on feeling like you have wisdom and you're discerning these things, but in reality, don't perceive, don't see God and his hand at work. He says, make the heart of this people dull, their ears heavy, and blind their eyes, lest they see with their eyes, hear with their ears, and understand with their hearts, and turn and be healed. He says, Isaiah, I want you to preach in a very particular way that when they hear what you say, it hardens their hearts and makes them move further away from me. It would be as if God said, listen, I know this afternoon you've got a family reunion, people coming from states around. This is what I want you to do. I want you to go in there, and I want you to speak to them in such a way that they never want to gather again. They never want to see you again. They never want to gather again. They don't want to come to your house again. I want you to preach in such a way that is so incredibly offensive that it drives them further away. This is the full bore of the wrath of God that has been foretold before they ever crossed over into the land. This is the final picture of what their rebellion looks like. God giving them over to their sin. Now, you remember what Isaiah said. He said, I'm a man of unclean lips, and I dwell amongst a group of people of unclean lips. I think there's a way that we read this and say, man, everybody that Isaiah is preaching to is innocent, like they're all there. Why would he preach such a heavy message? He preaches the message because they had previously chosen to rebel against God. He preaches the message because they have previously chosen to close their eyes, to stop up their ears, and to harden their hearts against God and against his call. But it doesn't stop this being a hard message for Isaiah. It doesn't stop this being a hard message for Isaiah. Like, he's the one that's got to carry this. And it's not like he's just got a mail campaign or he's like, okay, this we're just going to do kind of a media mail. We're going to blast this out. We're going to do an email campaign. We're going to do a social media blitz that just says, you've really upset God. Looks like you're headed into exile. Catch you next Sunday. Or not. You're not welcome because you've been disobedient to God. Just kidding. No, he personally has to carry this message. He personally has to go out. And it gives us an indication that what it is to be faithful to God is have a willingness to suffer. As our students go out into the schools, to be faithful to God is to have a willingness to suffer. It's a willingness to be mocked. It's a willingness to sit in your class, to profess your faith in Jesus to such a degree that the people around you know that you are a Christian and they judge your actions on what they know of Christianity. Are you willing to be isolated? Are you willing to be hated? Are you willing to be mocked? Are you willing to be ridiculed? And we recognize that no matter what profession, no matter what vocation, no matter what location we find ourselves living in, what street you find yourself living in, moving to, transitioning from, that to be a Christian is to be a person who is willing to live in adherence to the call with a determination and a willingness to suffer. Jesus' words to the disciples, if they persecuted me, they'll persecute you. A servant is not above their master. That the more we align our hearts with the glory of God and the goodness of Jesus, the more likely you are to suffer and be alienated. Are you willing to say yes to the call? Are you willing to say yes to the call? Recognize the call is not without hardship. Isaiah says before God, he says in verse 11, how long, O Lord? In essence, how long are you going to want me to do this? Is there an end date? Is this a 6-month thing? Is this a 1-year thing? When are the people going to wake up? Is there a chance at their redemption? Is there a chance of their resolution? Is there a chance that you would stay your mighty hand and stay your wrath? How long, O Lord? To which God responds until the end, until the exile. God responds and says, until cities lie waste without inhabitant, and houses without people, and the land is a desolate waste. And the Lord removes the people far away, and forsaken places are many in the midst of the land. Verse 13 goes on, it says, and though a tenth remain in it, it will be burned again like a terebinth or an oak. Like a terebinth or an oak. God says, I want you to remain, and I want you to stay, and I want you to preach this message till all have heard, and all those hearts are hardened and turned away. Ultimately, God's plan and provision for his people is that they would suffer the loss of the land, that they would go into exile, and that in exile, when they sit in the ash heap of the result of their sins and its consequences, they would have this moment in awakening to say, what have I lost? We've lost the land, we've lost our homes, we've lost our provisions. We are here living in slavery once again, and it's a slavery we chose when we chose to rebel against God. That finding themselves in the ash heap of life, that they would feel the call of God to return, the call of God to surrender, the call of God to be reunited to him in a faithfulness to him, that God would not be short on delivering his promises. So even in the hard message, even in the difficult message, we find that the Davidic line is nothing more than a stump, that from that stump, God would once again bring life, that God would once again bring life. He says that the stump that remains when it is felled, we recognize that saying yes to a love of God is a yes to hope in him alone, because we recognize that that stump, as he ends, is the holy seed. Flip over to Isaiah 11:1. Isaiah 11:1. You see, God is leading Isaiah into this understanding of what it is that he would bring from something that is dead, life for all. That he would bring from that which is dead, life for all. Isaiah 11:1, it says, there shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse, and a branch from his roots shall bear fruit. And he begins to talk about the Messiah. He says, and the Spirit of the Lord will rest upon him, and the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, and the Spirit of counsel and might. God's plan for the eternal redemption of humanity is that he would take that which is dead and bring us life through it, that he takes the dead stump of the Davidic line and he causes a root to shoot out of it, the shoot of Jesse, that they would have life, that they be returned to the land. But God's great, glorious plan for us as we recognize his holiness, as we recognize what it is to love him, we recognize his love because he loved us first. See, the glorious good news of the gospel is that God finds you in the deadness of your speech, the hardness of your heart, the deafness of your ears, the blindness of your eyes, and he extends to you life through a risen King who is dead and was made alive. And when we see him for all that he is, and we see him in his beauty, and we see him in his splendor, and we see him in the magnificence of his holiness, we have an acute sense and awareness of our brokenness, in which the world tells us that we are broken and irredeemable and unrepairable, and we need to stay in our brokenness. But the loving God of all the universe, who created all the things, sees us in our brokenness, sees us in our waywardness, and draws near to us, and he touches us at the place of our most significant sinfulness. God sees you. And God sees the waywardness of your sin right now where you sit. He sees the hidden sin in your heart, and he sees the egregious sin that everybody talks about. And he draws near to you in the person of Jesus. And his delight and desire is to take away the guilt from your sin and to atone that you might have life and the abundance of life, eternal life, never, ever having to pay the penalty and the punishment for your sin, but forever and always forgiven. You see, it's in the very deadness of our lives. It's in the very deadness of our sin that God calls us to say yes to hope as we say yes to loving God.
Hey guys, I hope this was a valuable resource for you as you're uncovering and discovering your role in God's story, as he delights in seeing us love him, love people, and make disciples. If you're interested in next steps, you can head over to our website, sv.church, and discover our service times and other ways to get plugged in. Look forward to seeing you there.